Good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday, June 24th. It's the solemnity today, the birth, nativity of St. John the Baptist. So it's a big celebration in the church today. We actually, in the church, we only celebrate liturgically 3 birthdays. We celebrate the birthday of our Lord, of Jesus, on Christmas. We celebrate the birthday of Our Lady. That is on September 8th. It's 9 months after the celebration of the Immaculate Conception. And then today we celebrate the birth of John the Baptist. So it's a great celebration in the church. It's a great day to have a good cup of tea. I just poured mine, so I was running late. I was on the phone and then waiting for the hot water to boil. So got to let my tea steep here for a little bit. Anyway, today to continue now in the discussions of marriage. So the previous 3 days, I think it was, I was talking about sanctifying marriage, that especially the aspect of grace, the spiritual life, the Lord at the center of it, how the Lord leads you in your marriage and your vocation. And today I want to touch on some of we talk about grace built on nature, and so some of the natural things that need to be present in marriage for marriage really to blossom, really to grow. And there are certain things that we know from the experience of married people. Certain things always have to kind of be a priority that you always have to be mindful of. For example, we know actually there was a study done by Creighton University out in Omaha, Nebraska, has this family institute. So they do a lot of study on the family, do different just studies, surveys, things like that. Anyway, they did a survey years ago for couples who had gotten divorced in their first 5 years of marriage. Figuring that in those early years, there's still often, that newness about married life, that joy of it. But so they did this national study of those who had gotten divorced and want to know what was the major reason. And people could put down all sorts of reasons. And there was these 3 reasons that were way above, like almost in the 80th percentile, all said one of these 3 was the major reason that really affected their marriage. After those 3, then it was in the teens, the percentages that said these were big factors. So they had titled at that time, the study, it was called Time, Sex, and Money. These 3 things that really had effect on their marriages. Today I want to talk about, in regards to time, communication, time with each other. But with finances too, that's a big thing too for people. And I think just in general, to put it real basic with finances, sometimes there may be the stresses about one's financial situation. But I think really when it comes to finances being an issue in a marriage, it's either the attitude about finances, in particular when either someone is greedy, they're focused always about their finances, that becomes like the end-all be-all for them. Obviously that's going to have a major effect on their relationship with their spouse because their heart is not focused on what is the priority. It's not on their spouse and not on God. Their heart is focused on money. And so then you have the struggle of attachments, financial attachments. Materialism becomes a serious problem. When people's hearts are set on those things, they think their happiness is going to be found in that, rather than that giving of themselves and receiving the love of their spouse. Because that time, as you know, that can be a hard thing at times. So it's easier to put one's heart in something that doesn't give you a hard time, but it is something that never brings you happiness. And so I think one is just the disposition, the mindset about finances, the priority. But another part, I think, is just being honest with each other about always one's financial situation. When making financial decisions, you try to make them together. You try to have a real sense of responsibility. Who's responsible for what? Practical things too, so that there's a sense of that you're in it together. And that also with finances is the real sense of that. Even if one of you makes more money than the other, is that this is a sense of ours. It's not, well, I work this, therefore I can do what I want with the money. No, we're in this together. And that's part of that sacrifice that you make out of love for the other, that there isn't this sense of like, well, this is mine. And so even financially, you communicate about not only expenses, you communicate things that you would think would be good, maybe say with purchasing, you communicate what you think would be something you'd like to do, and the difference between obviously needs and wants. You had to prioritize the needs, comes to wants. You got to respect, obviously, your insights and opinion of your spouse. If they think, when you say, oh, I'd really like to do this. Well, obviously, you want to be able to enjoy certain things in life. But also if the other sees, well, we have to remember this, we have to remember that, weighing certain concerns. You have to weigh what their thoughts, concerns, fears, whatever it may be. You have to weigh that when you're making decisions. So that was just, there's a lot when we go into finances, but I'm not a financial expert at all, so that'd be someone you want to talk to in financial things. But it's just more the disposition of the heart is an important thing. Now, communication. Communication is huge for a happy marriage. And one is just knowing with communicating, there's different ways of communicating. We communicate verbally, but we also communicate by action. We communicate by our body language. We communicate, a lot of times the best communicators are ones who recognize how to be a good listener. Listening is absolutely essential for good communication. I'll just get my tea bag out here, 1 second. But with that, with communicating with the other, there's certain virtues that come along with it. For good communication, it requires sincerity, it requires honesty, it requires humility. These things have to be fostered. And so that's something internally that one has to know. Be aware of yourself and be aware of what the others, the ways they communicate. In general, men and women do communicate a little bit differently. For example, I remember hearing this in a talk years ago. Now, it's not true of every man, every woman, but just a generality that can be true. That women in general are more verbal than men. And because they're more verbal, they want to engage more in the conversation. When it comes to, I remember hearing this, I thought, wow, that's a great point about men and women and differences, because there are differences. That in general, women, when they have conversations, like to know that you're looking at them, that they even visually, that they'll look at each other as they communicate about something. Two guys usually don't do that. Two guys will maybe look at each other for a little bit and then look away and have a conversation and kind of look at different things. If the two guys are kind of staring at each other, well, then a lot of times some guys interpret it as an intimidating thing, and sometimes it may lead to a fight. But two guys can have a whole conversation working on a car and not really ever look at each other and have a whole conversation about something. Whereas in general, with women, they like to be able to sit and look or stand, whatever, but to look at each other, to really know that the other's listening. And sometimes that becomes then a struggle in marriage, and that differences between men and women. Now, it is very important, as Rich points out here, eye contact. It doesn't mean you have to stare at the person, but to show that you're listening. And so when engaging in conversation about something, when there are secondary things around you, it's important to have those things weighed. For example, the television, the newspaper, that maybe you're reading something, the other starts talking. If you know it's something really important, okay, put the newspaper down. Look at them, turn towards them, to talk to them. If it's the television, okay, turn the TV off, or put it on mute. Pause it. That's one of the great things we can do nowadays with technology. You can pause whatever you're watching to turn and engage them in the conversation. Now, it goes the other way too. If you know the other is, say, really engaged in something, and what you want to talk to them is maybe in that moment not as important, sometimes you just know, what, they need that time. And so I got to give them a little space. And then after they finish this, I'll try to talk with them. But I think a more modern problem with communication is our cell phones. Cell phones have become a big issue. They're a big distraction for all of us. And so a lot of times we can be talking with someone, we might feel the phone vibrate, we might become curious about, maybe they mentioned something, like, oh, I'll look that up. But we don't say, hey, you want me to look that up? Or the phone vibrates and we immediately go to that. And what does that communicate to the person? It communicates that this phone, whatever's coming, this is more important than what you have to say to me. And so with our cell phones, we have to be really disciplined. And in general, as a people, we're not disciplined with the cell phone. That we have to learn to just let it ring. If it's a real emergency, if you need to look just to see who the call ID is, if it's an emergency, then you have to say, oh, you know what, either like, I'm sorry, I have been waiting for this. Do you mind if I wait for a moment? But if, say, it's a really important thing the person's come to you about, then even with the cell phone, you just click on the button to make it go silence, to let it go into your voicemail. That's why voicemail exists. People can leave messages. A lot of people don't want to leave messages, but this is part of the way that whenever someone's calling us, we need to expect that sometimes people are doing other things. And so we can't reach people whenever we want to reach them. And I think that's become a little bit of an issue for a lot of us nowadays. And so when when your spouse in particular is communicating with you, don't look at your cell phone. Keep it, maybe even put it over on the other side of the table. Turn it over so you're not tempted to look at it. And to really kind of look and listen to your spouse. Now, with communication, obviously, listening is crucial. And sometimes it's an art, like an art form. We have to learn how to listen well. And all of us have to work at that. Especially when maybe somebody, especially with a spouse, maybe there's certain things they talk about all the time. It's easy sometimes to start to tune them out. Well, they usually start to pick up on that. And we all know the experience. If I know I'm being tuned out by someone, I'm going to be less likely to want to talk with them the next time. And maybe sometimes it's something I have to learn to be patient with that person, or I have to forgive that person because they tuned me out. But to listen, when we're listening, is showing that we have a genuine interest in someone. And listening is a lot of times also trying to understand, maybe someone communicating isn't the best at conveying their thought at first. Some people are great at it, others aren't. And so do we try to get a sense of what is it they're really saying? Maybe we need to ask them. And that's asking sometimes is affirming to them that you're listening. If you don't fully understand, you're asking like, all right, do you mean this or do you mean that? Also with listening sometimes with your spouse, sometimes they just want to tell you something. And so it doesn't mean you always have to have an answer for them, but just by listening and affirming, maybe it's something they want to tell you, a funny thing that happened, you laugh with them about it, express interest in that way. That's huge. You also have to have a sense of time. Timing is very important. For example, if you know you're not a morning person, you're grumpy or something, all right, that's not the time to really engage in a serious conversation. And that's why in marriage, you got to know yourself, you got to know your spouse. You got to know what is a good time for them, what's a good time for you, and how do you try to meet in the middle? Maybe it's the same time that tends to work well, great. But for others, no. Maybe some people are a morning person, the others not. Okay, well, even though I want to talk about the important thing in the morning, that's a bad time for them. I got to respect that. And I got to work at trying to find what's a good time to talk with them. For some people, the last time they want to talk about important issues is when they get home from work. They want to first unwind. And even though maybe there's something really important, you're just like all day, you're like, oh, we got to talk about this, we got to talk about it. Well, as soon as they get there, you got to give them a chance to, at times, unwind. You give them a chance to relax a little bit. If they've had a bad day at work, okay, with communicating, if you're the one that had a bad day, all right, just let the other know it. And don't take it out on them. It's not their fault at all that you had a bad day at work. And so say you're coming home, just give them a heads up like, today was kind of a stressful day. And I know you want to talk about this particular thing. We will talk about it. I just need a little bit of time to unwind. And obviously coming home from work, it's a great time to pray. Learn to let go, to surrender to the Lord some of those crosses you experience, so that when you come into the door of your home, you're more at peace. When you come in, you're there for the person that you love, and they love you, even at times when there may be challenges. So you got to have a sense of time, what's a good time to communicate. When it comes to important matters, when you have to communicate about something important, and the other is getting worked up, okay, good communication recognizes, all right, if we're starting to get maybe into a little bit of an argument, okay, we have to let things calm down a little bit, and we'll come back a little bit later to talk about something. When either both or one of you, when you're in a little better disposition. Obviously, certain forms of communication are terrible. The silent treatment, that never works. It only makes things more difficult for people. Also, with communicating, don't presume the other knows exactly what you're thinking. Sometimes they have no idea what you're thinking. And so sometimes people can read into things and think, well, they know this or they know that. We talked about this 3 years ago, we talked about something and they should still remember it. Well, no, they maybe forgot, maybe that conversation, they totally forgot about it. And so never presume that this is their intention or this is what they mean. And And that's why it's very important. Sincerity, communicating, listening. It solves many problems in marriages. And along with that, and there's times when there's tension, maybe you have time in an argument, being willing to forgive and being quick to forgive, being quick to ask for forgiveness. With communicating, just like with anything, one of the great obstacles, one of the great challenges is pride. Our pride wreaks havoc. And so when we think we know better, or we refuse to do something because the other failed at something, and so now, I'm not going to do this for them, whatever. I'm not going to even communicate that I'm not going to do it for them. I'm not going to communicate that I'm angry. They know I'm angry. Well, maybe they don't know. Or they know there's anger and they don't know why. They can sense there's some tension. Well, the only way is by, be willing, be humble about it, ask the Holy Spirit to help you with it, and then engage in the conversation. In a moment when things are a little calmer, just try to communicate. This thing that happened earlier, that hurt, or this has been a struggle for me. But not just negative things. Communicate the good things. Communicate in regards with things that you're so grateful, something that they did. When you know they carried something out, maybe it's something they do every day, but do you make that effort at times to say, what, thank you so much for this. Thank you for what you've done here. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry. And get very practical in your gratitude with them. Just like you can be concrete sometimes when someone fails at something. Say, you failed to do it this particular way. It needs to be this certain way. All right? But yet, do we get practical? Do we get concrete in our gratitude? Especially, what? The way you did that was great. Or thank you for doing this for me. I know you had a long day. You didn't have to do that. I should have done that. I'm sorry I failed to do this, but thank you so much for this. That is crucial, to really appreciate the other. And not appreciating just what they do for you, to appreciate things about them, to really acknowledge their goodness, to acknowledge their quality, acknowledge their characters. And always at night, make sure when you go to bed, you try to make sure when you go to bed that you're at peace with each other, that you don't go to bed with this tension between each other. So you try to always make up the best you can. And as Rich points out here, always, that when you have to talk to someone, you always try to be, especially if you make a correction, you try to bring out the positive first. Try to acknowledge the good things, but then you bring up, but there's this one particular thing that happened, or this thing that you said, or whatever. And so you help them to see that you're coming in with love. You're not coming in with control. You're not coming in to put down. Putting down never helps. Even if you're right, by trying to put a person in their place, you've just made things worse. By even when you're right, but if you do it with a lack of charity, you do it with a way of kind of being cutting, putting someone in their place, it's going to always cause pain. And so, communication, it's something we always are learning. And that's why sometimes couples who really have grown in their love, even in, as elderly couples, they might still have little moments of, butting of heads, little moments of frustration, things like that. But they tend to know each other so well, their ability to communicate, because they've worked at it so much, all right, it doesn't have to entail as much in the conversations. But they still may have to recognize if certain things become a little bit, habits start to get in the way, how do they start to work at it to make sure they're making time? I know I went well beyond my time here, but other points. Have dinner together. It's a great time to communicate. Obviously, don't talk with food in your mouth. But it's a great time when you're sitting there, enjoy your time with each other. Don't try get into the habit of eating your meals in front of the television when you can. And first, just spend time with each other. They're all going to, eventually in time, it always bears fruit. But it requires work. It requires grace. But this is where grace builds on nature. You can pray as much for your spouse, but if you're not communicating, as much as God's offering the graces, you're not going to grow. There's the natural part, the communication about things in life, things that you're sensing, things you're feeling, things you're struggling with, communicating things about your kids, trying to help each other understand things that are going on, the whole gamut. But that's absolutely essential. So we're going to finish up with that. I mean, there's a lot of things to talk about marriage, but the last few days have been going through marriage, and so tomorrow we're going to talk about just a core thing that makes the bond of marriage, openness to life. What does the church teach there about it? What does she not teach about it? A lot of times people misunderstand certain things, so we're going to touch on that. Again, tomorrow and Friday, I have funerals at 10 o'clock both days. So T'nT will be at another time. At some point during the day, I'll have the recording of that. Hope everyone has a great day. Again, enjoy the solemnity. It's a great day. It's a solemnity. It's a day to celebrate. Maybe have a good cup of tea. Maybe some ice cream or something. But enjoy it. It's a great day. God bless everyone. Bye.